In recent weeks, whispers of a covert British intelligence operation aimed at crippling Russia's so-called shadow fleet have sent shockwaves through international circles. Russian state media and officials allege that the United Kingdom is preparing to stage a dramatic incident, perhaps a sabotaged tanker explosion, to justify NATO naval action near Russian waters. According to these claims, NATO allies would then use the crisis to launch major inspections, seizures, and a crackdown on ships suspected of shipping illicit Russian oil. The narrative is so sensational, it sounds straight out of a Cold War thriller. Behind the scenes, London has not officially confirmed involvement, but Western officials acknowledge that NATO nations, and especially the United Kingdom, are increasingly focused on pressure tactics, including more aggressive surveillance and inspections, aimed at vessels tied to Russia's sanctioned oil exports. These vessels, part of the so-called shadow fleet, often hide their identities, sail under flags of convenience, and skirt price cap regulations. The suspicion is that a triggering event would permit formal international action against them under the guise of maritime safety. NATO's response has been strategic and highly visible. Under its Baltic Sentry mission, air, surface, and underwater platforms now patrol critical zones of the Baltic Sea, monitoring activity suspected of targeting vital undersea cables and pipelines. Frigates, drones, and maritime sensors form a layered surveillance mesh across hotspots like the Danish Straits and Swedish economic zones. NATO warships, including the multinational Standing Maritime Group 1, now keep watch over suspicious tankers, tracking erratic behaviors, abrupt route shifts, and anchor-dragging incidents that have frequently preceded cable damage. In Britain, defense leaders have warned Moscow directly. Parliamentary declarations cited Russian spy ships lurking near critical infrastructure, mapping undersea cables and threatening national security. Officials stressed that patience was waning and that robust action would not be ruled out. Meanwhile, rules of engagement were relaxed to allow British naval forces to approach and inspect suspicious vessels, a rare escalation in maritime boundaries. Across Europe, undersea cables linking Sweden, Finland, Estonia, and Latvia have suffered repeated damage, often with Moscow blamed. Anchors dragging cables, sudden power outages, and telecom disruptions have prompted forensic investigations. While some authorities caution accidental causes, geopolitical analysts see a pattern: vessels from Russia's shadow fleet operating near cables before tears and outages occur. Russian intelligence has fired back with dramatic accusations. It claims that British agents are not merely passive observers, but are planning to plant or stage a tanker disaster so grave that it could be blamed on Russia, thereby unleashing NATO action. The alleged plan includes two sinister scenarios: triggering an oil spill in a strategic strait to produce environmental catastrophe, or torch tanker fires in friendly ports, either serving as a pretext for coordinated intervention. Whether true or propaganda, these allegations have fueled alarm. Moscow insists the West is orchestrating a false flag to justify closing off its Baltic access and imposing secondary sanctions globally. Western diplomats dismiss these assertions as deflection, pointing to credible investigations linking real sabotage to Russian proxies and the Wagner-linked Department of Special Tasks. Recent legal proceedings in London have added credibility to sabotage concerns. Young individuals recruited via encrypted platforms like Telegram confessed to arson targeting Ukraine-supporting warehouses coordinated by Russia-affiliated handlers. These covert operations, involving amateur bomb makers paid a few $1,000s, expose a growing hybrid threat that parallels maritime sabotage in complexity and danger. Security analysts warn that these hybrid tactics are escalating beyond sabotage fires. The range now includes recruitment of untrained operatives, explosive devices at civilian venues, and even plots targeting Russian dissidents abroad. The Baltic incidents, the warehouse fires, and the maritime sabotage are part of a broader campaign of destabilization attributed to Russia's intelligence apparatus and its proxy systems. In response, European governments and NATO are investing heavily in infrastructure defense. Cooperation agreements now require suspicious ships to carry verifiable insurance documents, operate transponders, and be subject to random inspections. Tankers unable or unwilling to comply face detention, seizure, or sanction. Some Baltic states have already detained vessels suspected of violating sanctions or involved in prior sabotage. The United Kingdom and Danish navies, in close partnership through the Joint Expeditionary Force, now deploy small flotillas across the Baltic. Maritime Command, assisted by AI-enhanced tracking systems like Nordic Warden, continuously analyzes tanker behavior for signs of anchor dragging, AIS switching, or rendezvous at sea. This operation represents a dramatic escalation in transparency and threat mitigation. Meanwhile, the idea that the United Kingdom or NATO might orchestrate a spectacular incident to create political justification is stirring controversy. In Moscow, such claims are amplified as evidence of Western desperation. But in Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw, official statements emphasize legitimate responses to real sabotage, pointing to severed cables and credible forensic trails beyond speculation. Even beyond immediate security, environmental policy is now entwined with defense strategy. Anchor dragging by poorly maintained tankers threatens marine ecosystems, fisheries, and coastal economies. Leaders in Baltic capitals argue that maritime sabotage is double-edged. It hurts critical infrastructure and wrecks marine environments, necessitating globally coordinated deterrence. All the while, diplomatic fault lines widen. Russia frames the West as aggressors manipulating narrative. NATO and allied governments portray Moscow as the aggressor. Neutral countries are forced to scrutinize shipping routes more carefully. Oil markets jitter at the thought of tanker seizures and port disruptions. Public attention focuses on the fragile balance between legitimate enforcement and provocative escalation. In the broader geopolitical picture, the Baltic Sea has emerged as a frontline not only for trade but for symbolic confrontation. As Baltic states, Sweden, Finland, and NATO increase patrols, Russia responds with veiled intelligence threats or real sabotage. The Shadow Fleet, once used to evade sanctions, now serves as a focal point for alliance coordination and confrontation. Should a tanker explode, or be made to explode, the repercussions would be seismic. NATO could invoke emergency inspection protocols, coordinate blockades, and justify sanctions on energy buyers of Russian crude. That would ratchet up pressure on global markets and challenge diplomatic ties with countries still trading with Moscow. Whether intentional or accidental, the impact would be far-reaching. Ultimately, the simmering conflict highlights the blurred lines of modern conflict. Hybrid warfare now extends underwater into law courts, digital platforms, and proxy networks. NATO's movement closer to Russia's doorstep reflects not conventional troop deployments, but persistent surveillance, enforcement, and readiness to act quickly on maritime threats. The situation remains volatile. Every ship passage through the Baltic is scrutinized. Every undersea incident raises questions of intent. And every statement by intelligence services, British or Russian, adds a layer to the cat-and-mouse geopolitical contest. On this new battlefield, war is waged below surface, through cables, through pipelines, through ships that sail under flags of obfuscation. In sum, whether the United Kingdom is plotting sabotage or simply preparing defenses, NATO has moved decisively. Forward deployments, tightened inspections, and collaborative naval commands now define a new posture. The world watches as vessels pass by, some laden with sanctioned oil, some just passing through, but each now under the restless eye of an alliance determined to counter a shadowy adversary at sea. The escalating tension in the Baltic region, centered around the alleged United Kingdom plot and NATO's expanded presence, is a reflection of a broader transformation in modern warfare. No longer confined to traditional battlefields, the conflict has moved into the grey zone, where sabotage, surveillance, and economic disruption now hold as much weight as missiles and tanks. Whether or not the United Kingdom is actively planning an act of sabotage, the perception of such a possibility has already shifted the geopolitical atmosphere. Russia sees itself encircled and threatened, while NATO claims to be acting in defense of critical infrastructure and maritime security. The role of Russia's Shadow Fleet adds another volatile element to the equation. These unregistered or loosely regulated oil tankers are central to Moscow's attempt to bypass Western sanctions. Their frequent violations of international maritime rules, coupled with their presence near sensitive undersea cables and ports, have drawn increasing scrutiny. NATO's decision to closely monitor and in some cases intervene with these vessels marks a significant escalation in enforcement tactics, one that Russia interprets as provocative and potentially hostile. Any misstep at sea could lead to confrontation. In this environment, the threat of false flags, staged incidents, or even accidental disasters becomes more dangerous than ever. An explosion aboard a Shadow Fleet vessel, whether caused by mechanical failure or something more nefarious, could serve as a flashpoint for major geopolitical retaliation. The entire situation now resembles a high-stakes game of brinkmanship, where each side is testing the limits of what it can do without crossing into open conflict. The fragility of this balance is heightened by the covert nature of modern operations and the inability to clearly attribute blame. For NATO, particularly for nations like the United Kingdom, Denmark, and the Baltic states, the stakes are high. Their economies, infrastructure, and security are increasingly targeted in hybrid attacks that aim to confuse and exhaust their response capabilities. NATO's tightening grip on the Baltic, through expanded patrols and greater maritime authority, represents a defensive posture, but one that Moscow views as aggression. The result is a complex and dangerous feedback loop. The more the alliance moves to protect itself, the more Russia prepares for confrontation. Ultimately, the situation underscores how quickly the line between peace and war can blur in today's multipolar world. A single spark, real or fabricated, could ignite a wider crisis. The international community must tread carefully, balancing the need for deterrence with the risk of provocation. Whether the United Kingdom is planning sabotage or simply preparing for it, the region has entered a new era of tension, where cables, tankers, and drones have become the front lines of a conflict that is far from resolved. Credits written and narrated by your channel team. Thank you for watching.